Good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. I'm a little bit nasally today, so I had 3 days of a cold, which is a little bit rare for me, but it's going around here, in Melbourne. So, anyway, we're all
That's right
good.
here.
Yeah, so you're here. It's good to see you again. We're gonna talk about something a little different today. So we're gonna talk about self-compassion, and whatever that means to me, whatever it means to you. If you're listening in, what does it mean to you? And how does it show up for you in your reality? And we're going to talk on this topic. You ready to roll?
Yep, sounds good. Sounds good. And I think, yeah, this is a good one because we often have clients saying that they don't know how to do compassion, and usually it's for self. So I think this is quite an important one for many people. They don't know
Yeah.
what it is. They don't know how to apply it to self. Yeah,
Yeah.
so good
Yeah,
topic.
100%. Love that. Yeah. So actually, it's a good point. We probably should actually try and define what self-compassion is before we talk about it. And the context is we're doing a bunch of stuff on this together with clients at the moment, which is really cool. We're going to do a couple of weeks on this in a row. We're really going to explore it, and how it shows up for us personally. And then we're going to do some practical exercises on how to develop it. And so it's nice timing. And so, yeah, self compassion, I guess the self word probably needs not too much explanation, other than the fact that, obviously the self can be seen in many different ways. We may touch on that a little later on, but this is about yourself. It's not compassion necessarily directed to another person. But yeah, compassion. Lots of people have got lots of different definitions of that. Would you like to have a go first? What's your thoughts on it?
So I would say compassion, in terms of the way that I work with people on it, is less about kind of doing nice things for self, even though that can be important, but more about understanding ourselves without judgment.
Okay.
And so it's for me, it's like a piece around self responsibility.
Uh-huh.
So it's identifying that there's something potentially going on for us, and rather than judging that it's happening for us or judging ourselves for why it's happened, it's being able to understand why it's happened, why we did what we did, say we've done something bad. Get to a place of understanding it, understanding what the positive intention may be for doing what we're doing, and an exploration maybe to see what's happened to us in our past, which may have brought us to this situation right now. And really, the most important part in this is the judgment piece. So, the less judgmental we are, the more compassionate we can be. Whilst we're judging ourselves for doing things that aren't right and are bad, then compassion is kind of blocked in theory. So yeah, that's a short take on it. What do you
Yeah, I
say?
love it. I love it. And, it's such a hot topic at the moment, and particularly in leadership circles and business and in society more generally. I love your definition. Yeah, I'm pretty close to that. And just perhaps for me, it's identifying the need to be in service of. So, it's as opposed to self care, which I think you delineated early on in your definition. I agree with you. Self care might be part of it, but we're not talking about going to a day spa or getting a pedicure or going and getting a haircut or whatever. This might be more on the self care side of things, but compassion can be soft and it can also be quite directed. So it can be masculine and feminine, but it's really about identifying the underlying need to be in service of, which is, I think, what you were talking
So
to.
go on, describe, say more about that.
Yeah. So with your description, I'm in full agreement. It's like, things happen for us, or they might be perceived to happen to us. And typically we either go into judgment and self-criticism mode, or we might go into self-compassion, reflective mode. So they're on a little bit of a polarity, like you suggested. And the self-compassion for me is what's the driver underneath it, which is, I think, what you're alluding to too. And then the next step of how can I be in service to that?
So go on, what does that part mean?
So how do I act? Or maybe not act, as the case
Right.
might be. But what do I do with this awareness? Because sometimes
Okay.
I think we don't close the loop. And so for me, self compassion is not necessarily, sitting in introspection and that's it. Self compassion for me is identifying, what's missing or what's unfulfilled or what's needed, and how can you be in service to yourself in relation to that need. Does that make more
Okay.
sense?
So what would an example be? Yeah, break it.
Yeah. Okay. So, for example, I've had a bit of a cold over the last 3 days. And, in a sense, that's got in the way of work, let's say over the last 4 or 5 days, actually, because I felt a little bit peaky at the end of last week. And actually, as I'm talking about this is good. I couldn't go to Sydney. And so I had to bail on a 2-hour workshop with a client. And,
Got you.
in the past, I might have felt a little bit guilty about that, or,
Okay.
a little bit of aspect of embarrassment, or, something like that. I haven't analyzed this in too much detail, to be honest. And that's probably not particularly healthy or helpful. So in a moment, you might experience a little bit of guilt around that, because we do live in a society and we don't want to stand people up or let people down necessarily. But feeling that guilt for a prolonged period of time, ruminating on it, is really not that helpful. I was sick. And so, at the same time, I didn't want to pass that on to clients. And so there was the other side of the coin. It was probably responsible for me to not go and, expose them to a cold potentially. And so, in the past, I might have criticized myself about that. Why did I get sick? What's going on here? Da, 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 da. And now it's more, okay, I am sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, this is not where I want to be. So it's not necessarily that I'm criticizing myself, but it's like I don't want to be sick. And so accepting what is, deciding, what the need is, which is not to not be sick, and then pointing the arrow of attention and action in the direction of not being sick anymore. Okay.
Which would look like what?
Which would look like a bit of self care, a bit of
Okay.
refocusing on the health, a
Yeah.
bit of clearing out enough time and not judging myself for not working on the business, or,
Yeah.
doing things that I had scheduled, and giving myself permission to be totally unplanned and unscripted for 3 days
Okay.
in service of getting over this cold. And I'm almost
Yeah.
there.
Is there any impatience or anything around the fact that there's sickness? Yeah. So this
Of
is
course.
where that compassion piece comes in, right? Because it's not okay to be sick.
Yeah.
And it's like, can we apply the compassion? And I know that's obviously a process in itself of, compassion to self, that the self is sick.
Yeah.
Um,
So there is a little bit of impatience, and I think that's entirely healthy in some respects. So, for example, as soon as I noticed that the cold was coming on, vitamin C,
sure.
elderberry, these sorts of things. What can I do to move my body in a gentle way that might help the body, process what it's going through? And so, yes, I can have this tendency to impatience 100%, but in a sense, that's quite healthy and helpful too. Trying
But
to
it
get
can be
ahead
for
and
some
cut it short.
people. So I think
Something.
it's, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So compassion is going to look differently for different
exactly.
people in different contexts. This is just one, and we've taken a
Yeah.
little red pill.
Yeah, but I think it's important for for us, for all of us, for us listening, is the most important part of this is, regardless of what you did or you didn't do, is what are you saying to yourself about it? Because if
Oh, yeah.
someone's sitting there and they're going, right, I need to get over this, I need to get better, I'm going to go and buy all the meds that I can to just stuff this in, because it's not okay to be sick.
Mm.
Do I actually need to lie down? Could it be beneficial to my system that would actually impatience my way to, wellness by actually just lying down? Because we could actually get better quicker. So it's all around just watching this, the self-talk. And, and also there could be a thing around, if someone is in that example, if there is this sense of impatience and it's not okay to not be sick, there's a potential there for someone to go into an exploration, because this is me, this would have been me, of, where did that frame come from, that it's not okay to be sick? So for me, it wasn't ever okay for me to be sick, as I was,
Okay.
when I was working, let's say, in a corporate space. And the association was that there was a lot of sickness in my family as I was growing up, and I watched family members get sick a lot. And so I rejected that part. It didn't feel safe
Yeah.
to be sick because of what I saw. So I went through life always being okay. I was always okay. And once a year I'd go down with something and I might have a couple of days off, but it would literally be once a year. But the identity was with I don't get sick, which in a way, again, we could say is compassionate because I'm protecting myself to not be what I saw growing up. But ultimately, there was a resistance to, sometimes being able to allow the body to just rest because it was just wanting to go, go, go until it really did collapse, say once a year. So
Yeah.
it's just really paying attention in mind to what we're saying to ourselves and why, what the story is on behalf of from our past potentially.
Yeah, 100%. So I think it might be a great time to actually, bring it up a notch because we've gone into a little bit of detail there, which is cool. So, Kristen Neff is, an author in this space. She's done a lot of research on self-compassion. And, as part of preparing for what we do with clients, I had a little bit of a look over her material, and she sort of has 3 components to what she describes as self-compassion. I'll probably forget them. And if
It's not
I
very
do, I'll be
compassionate.
compassionate. Yeah.
Appropriate.
I will bring my compassion if I do forget them. But one of them's mindfulness. And, so that's what we're talking about here, being mindful about, what's going on with the self-talk and not overindulging in self-criticism and self-defeating, rumination. What was the other couple? Geez, I'm losing me marbles right now. Common humanity was one of them. And, I kind of feel like that's an interesting one, particularly in relation to self-compassion. But I guess what she's saying is, everyone gets sick or everyone has, similar experiences of life. And so, often people can think that their own suffering in their own world is unique to them and very special. But actually, humans experience suffering, by our very nature. And so that's part of what she talks about as well. And the third one will come back to me. Geez, I'm losing the plot today. It will come back to me, or I'll Google it while we're online. Um, but I found it. I did find it interesting, and what I found really interesting that we might talk into a little more is this balance of self-criticism and self-compassion. So that's kind of the polarity, and I might throw this over to you first to just talk into the balance of the polarity because I've got some thoughts there, and I don't want to front run you. So maybe to you
Go, go,
first.
no, go for it. Go for it. There's
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah, nothing arising. Go, go, go.
Go, 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 go. Yeah. So, I think you might have mentioned it at the start of this potty. A lot of people can be very harsh on themselves. So they can be very critical. And there's a lot of judgment, self-talk running day and night, 24/7. A lot of clients report that they can't sleep or they get disturbed or disrupted sleep, that they're stressed, that they're not hitting their revenue targets, that the team's not performing, et cetera, et cetera. These are the common problems, and it can be pretty easy to get yourself into a self-critical loop or a lot of inner dialogue going on. And so self-compassion is kind of positioned as the antidote to that. And it makes total sense. We want to have a balance of self-compassion and self-criticism, let's say. And some people might say, why would you want to criticize yourself? Well, I get a lot of high achievers into coaching with me. And a big lion's share of why they've been successful is because they've criticized themselves to success.
Well,
And so
that's the way of the world.
that's the way of
Is
the
it the
world.
most effective? I don't know, but it's
Well,
the way
that's
of the
right.
world. Yeah,
And
we were brought up
I'm going to build
judged,
on
and
this.
we will judge ourselves further.
I'm going to
So
build on this, right? And so, they criticize themselves on the way to success. And so, for a lot of people, failure is not an option. Giving up's not an option. Accepting things as they are is not an option. And so they persist and exert their will on reality and, all this stuff. And they're very tenacious, adaptable, and usually highly resilient people until it gets too much.
We think so. It seems so.
It seems so. Right. So in a sense, there's a bit of a link up to certain stages of adult development between being successful and actually propelling yourself, motivating yourself through some sort of judger. And then after a certain point in time, after we've developed a little bit more, that tends to get relaxed a little more. But there was a really interesting conversation, and I'm just going to put it out there that, I am an advocate for a healthy balance of self-criticism and self-compassion. In other words, I'm not of the view at this point in my development that we should completely eliminate, our function that wants us to do better. Some people may be, and I respect that. But I feel like there's a role for our psyche to motivate us in search of a better quality of life until the search
because
is
we
over.
don't trust ourselves that we can just do that without that
Right.
voice in our head that's
right.
where we're at, right? So it's,
and when I'm talking here, I'm talking to most people. And so I was listening to. Do you want to say anything on that before I go?
No, I'm good.
Cool.
Go.
Sorry, I've just been gassing for a bit.
No.
There's that inner critic there. I've been gassing too long.
Don't worry.
So there
I
was
was
a
doing the
really
same.
cool. There was there was a really cool. God, who needs the self to criticize? There was this really cool podcast, Modern Wisdom. Chris Williamson, English fella. I think you listen a little bit to Chris as well, right? I really like his podcasts. I think they're pretty cool.
I know him because he was on Love Island, but I don't listen to his podcasts.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, that's
I'm joking.
Oh my God. Now we're taking a real red pill.
That's how he got famous in theory. That's where it all started. Never diss the best program in the world.
So he had Naval Ravikant on. And, I think a lot of people on LinkedIn and perhaps Facebook and Instagram will know Naval. Pretty successful, by modern Western measures, successful human being, investor, very, very shrewd business person, but also a philosophical student of life. And he was asked the question around this. They didn't talk directly to self-compassion, but they were talking about self-esteem. And so Naval sort of postulated that self-esteem is the most valuable currency that one can have in life. And, his point of view was something along the lines of, sorry, I'm going to paraphrase and bastardize this, but it was something along the lines of, Chris asked him, well, you've been very successful, is your point of view on happiness and being present and being mindful, etc., predicated on the fact that you're already successful or not? And I think Naval had a really wise answer to that, in that he said, well, it's much easier for me to be this way because I've already been successful.
Of course.
And and if other people are struggling to put food on the table, then it's easy for me to say, well, just go and do things that make you happy and be content. And
yeah, totally.
But that's not people's
I think
reality.
that's anyone in humanity. It's yeah.
But what he was saying, Anita, which I don't think a lot of quote unquote successful, from a material perspective would say, is that often they'll shun it and they'll say, well, money doesn't make you happy. But Naval's like, no, actually money does, to a certain point, because you've got to have enough of it,
Well, it doesn't mean that it makes you happy. It just makes you feel safe, let's say. Is it that, it's happy, or just we're meeting our basic survival needs?
Right.
And that also could be said that when you do see someone that doesn't have as much money, are they really that much worse off than people that are earning loads of money and are going and getting themselves messed up on lots of drugs? So I think it's
100%.
individual. Like I don't,
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah. But I think it's
yeah.
fascinating in the context of this discussion, and I'd love to open it up to you to
Mm,
muse on this sort of triangle, if you like. But he was sort of saying, as I understood him, that self-esteem's the ticket to a quality life. You want to feel as though you're valuable and you're worth having your best life. And in a sense, that's an act of radical self-compassion. In fact, he sort of promotes this view of holistic selfishness, which not a lot of people talk about. But
sure.
he's very much about taking responsibility for your own life, having agency to get the success that you want for yourself in life, and um, having this balance of being able to fuel yourself in whatever way works for you, whether it's a little bit of self-talk at sometimes to bring about your next level, or whether it's the more compassionate side of yourself. And I thought it was a fairly
Yeah,
wise,
sure.
mature point of view. I'd love you to explore that area.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think there's levels of it, right? And I think some people are much more driven by needing the success and the money and all the rest of it in order to feel like a somebody or to feel anything. And there's other people that don't need to push themselves that hard, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they feel any better or worse than the people that are doing stuff. So I think this is a very individual thing. And ultimately, the only thing that really does come up for me is ultimately the less that we talk to ourselves, the less we, whether it's criticize, the less self-talk that we're running, full stop, the better we are in theory. Because whilst there's all that noise running for us in mind, it's always going to be telling us that we're not good enough, whether we've got money or we haven't got money, whether we've got success, whether we haven't got success. There's always going to be, so for me, the biggest part of any of the work of, true self-compassion is to kind of be okay with whatever you're doing, whatever choices you're making. If you're criticizing yourself to be better because your whole identity is based on that, then that's probably not the healthiest. In the same way, if you're criticizing yourself, down to the individual, I'd say. But I will still go with the more we understand ourselves, the quieter we are, there's compassion, and it's like, and I do think that, as we move through the adult stages of psychological development, as we free ourselves of all of that, a lot of that noise, we're not chasing needing to be anything anymore. And
Right.
that's not even chasing trying to be the most enlightened spiritual person either,
Right.
because that kind of drops off as well. And then there's just, not too much there. But I mean, realistically, there's not many people in the
Know
world,
we were going to go here today.
but it's all same, right? Whatever it is that
Yeah.
we're trying to
Yeah.
free ourselves. We still okay. I don't earn as much money, but I'm really spiritual, let's say. So there's my
Right.
identification. There's my esteem from that. In theory, it's just another means. We kind of go, we criticize each other for what the choices are of the others, but ultimately we're all doing it in order to whatever we're choosing in order to try and feel better. And
Let's
that's
talk
our
a little. Let's talk a little into just stages, and we don't need to go into too much detail. But let's say we take some well-known public figures, as a case in point. It'd be interesting to see. I mean, we can't see on the interior of these people, right? But Trump and Putin probably don't strike one on the exterior as having a whole hell of a lot of self-compassion. Who knows
self.
what's going on
Yeah,
the
for
inside?
sure.
We don't know.
Lot of judgment for sure.
A
I would
lot of
see them as
judgment.
very
Yeah,
self-critical, needing to do more, to be seen more,
quite
to be
possibly.
yeah.
Yeah. And
But
so
again,
these, this kind of area would be, earlier in our psychological maturity. And then a lot of people will join, an in group, whether it's religion or science or a sporting group or a some sort of group, and they'll very heavily identify with that group and whether they belong inside or outside of that. And again, there's not a lot of self-compassion, in that space either. Usually there's a lot of rules going on. If I do this, then I'll be compassionate to myself. If I break the rules, then I'll be discompassionate to myself. And, like, my dad would probably even fall a touch into that. If he doesn't go to church on Sunday morning, there's probably a dialogue in there saying, he's a naughty 81-year-old boy. Yeah. And so, this is earlier in our stages of development. And then there's the striving for achievement. There's more self-compassion in this stage, but still not a lot. It's very pragmatic self-compassion. So what's meant by that is if it's in service of achieving a goal, then the self-compassion will be applied. And if it's not, it won't be.
Yeah.
And then we move on to the next stage, which, is coming through in society in leaps and bounds now. This is the egalitarian kind of wave that we've had, the social justice and environmental wave that we've had. This is much more liberal compassion. So there's typically a lot of compassion at this stage, although there's some dysfunction in it too, which we may or may not get into. But sometimes, and this is the interesting part of this balance of criticism and compassion, sometimes the compassion can be too much. And so, again, this is a bit of a judgment call, but it's like,
Well, no, but it's a stage where it starts to come in because it's been missing. So it
it's
makes a
been
lot of
missing.
sense for us to go extreme into something
Right.
that we've been missing. So it's a very necessary stage.
And
That's
so
why we're falling into it, because we necessarily need to start to be more compassionate versus, all of those striving for success, for power, all the rest of it in the earlier stages. So we're only moving as we need to evolve as human beings. So if anything's over, it's because there's this thing of there's a polarity that's now, in theory, at some point going to become more in balance.
Right, and that's so interesting, isn't it? So, like, even if we look, and I don't want to get too political on these podcasts, and there's no real position being stated here, but if we look at the protests going on in universities around Israel and Palestine at the moment, this is really a tug of war between compassion and criticism. So, as a society, we're
All on
becoming
behalf of the same thing, right?
all
Which
on
will be
behalf of the
a
same
care
thing.
at some level. So it's
Right,
same. It's two ends of a continuum. It's just which
right.
way are we going?
And the
So it's
question we're trying to ask ourselves as society, I think, is what's the appropriate level of compassion, um, given all that's come before? And so, this balance of compassion and criticism is really interesting. The research says that it's really, really healthy for our well-being, even our performance, all sorts of things. So if you're a leader, compassion for self is a really, really good trait to build and focus on. And then on the other hand, leaders that have this perhaps in excess can be seen as incompetent and ineffective because they're not necessarily taking the action or demonstrating the agency to solve problems of, let's say, order and rule and fairness and et cetera, et cetera. And this is our stages of development coming through. But what's really interesting that I just want to keep a little bit of focus on is this balance between compassion and criticism. And so,
and this is the key to it. It's if there's over compassion happening, let's say within an individual, it's going to be some sort of trauma response.
yeah,
So it's not authentic.
yeah,
If we're overly critical,
right,
it's going to be the same thing. So that it kind of falls into the more that we can understand ourselves, how we do compassion, how we do criticism, blah, 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 where it's come from, what's our, what was our childhood experiences and all the rest of it. The more we can understand that, the more potential is that we're going to be in balance of that. And we're not going to be run by our trauma. We're going to be run more by the authenticity and the movement of us. What's necessary here in the moment, let's say with ourselves, with our staff, it may not seem that compassionate to some people, but it's authentic and it's coming from a place that is going to be healthy, even though that person may not see it in that moment. And I think,
I
yeah,
love that.
I would say
I
that's
love that so much. Because actually, I'm going to go a little step further here, and as you do so beautifully, pull me back if you think I'm going too far. I was musing over the weekend as I was reflecting on this subject, and Brené Brown has been a beacon of light to, I think, so many people across the globe, like with her research on vulnerability. And she talks about authenticity quite a bit, and Kristen Neff with compassion. And this is all relatively new for Western psychology and Western peeps in general. And I was actually thinking, I was casting my mind forward and sort of thinking about how it seems like people have fused together authenticity, vulnerability, and compassion. And we've got a certain segment of the population that are almost like wallflowers, whereas they're fusing those three qualities together, thinking they're the same thing. And to be authentic is just to be completely wide open with the kimono and be as soft as possible. And this is what I'm seeing a lot of. Maybe it's just my filters are slightly misguided, but I don't know
I
if you
think
want
it's
to say
definitely a shadow, isn't it? That side.
a little bit of a shadow here. Yeah,
Not
probably.
okay.
Oh, no, I'm okay with it, right? I'm okay with it. But actually, I do wonder whether in 5-10 years' time, we'll be cursing the movement of vulnerability.
Well, we're going to be, because we're constantly
Exactly.
mismatching and saying there's something better. We're doing it every day of our lives. I'm better than
Yeah.
you. This is better. This works better than that. And that is also, a certain way, it's compassionate, but it's also discompassionate in the sense that it's not our full truth. And there's usually something egoic within that we're comparing ourselves to
Exactly.
people that may be doing something that we're not being seen for. So I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
there's
yeah.
that whole thing of we are in constant comparison, mismatch, and trying to be better by judging, criticizing what
Right.
came before. And that's part of, and it's such an important one to watch, because it's always, it's kind of like sitting here going, music was so much better when I was young. And that's like exactly what our parents would say when we were young. But we're just picking up the same stuff and we're hypnotizing ourselves with constant judgment and criticism, not realizing that it's not the actual full potential of us.
Yeah.
There's probably something in there that is feeling a bit of a lack, that we're in this comparison and judgment of others, rather than going, okay, what's going on for me as I see that person doing well, or that piece of work, being relevant to some people. Just because I don't agree with it, it doesn't mean
Right.
that it's not going to be good for people. So yes, it will be criticized at some point, because unless we have evolved ourselves in those 10 years to not be as critical as
Yeah,
we are now.
I was even thinking about just, it's really popular at the moment to sort of bare all and tell your story, warts and all. And, this is sort of seen as vulnerability, and then there's strength in that, from, the people that espouse this stuff, which I think there's some truth in that. But
And I think if
I
we
do
can
just
see that
wonder.
it's a movement through the populations, then regardless of what we may individually think, it's working for people. If it's working for people, it's necessary and it's relevant. You know,
Right.
as we say, the same with the wars, we can be in absolute arms of it, but we're all part of this. We're all part of what's going on here. The war within
You
ourselves.
go to AI or the wars at some point.
Well, the war within ourselves that we are constantly in conflict with is exactly what we see out in the world. So this is where the self-compassion can really start to come in. It's starting to see that the more we're judging what's happening outside, the more we're criticizing all of this, there's a great opportunity to start to look within. And how are we talking to ourselves as we criticize, judge, and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
All of the stuff that's going outside, as if we're kind of separate to it. It's not, it's us. And this is the kind of real movement, for the world, once we can start to embrace that without criticizing ourselves, have compassion for us humans that are suffering just as well as everyone else in the world that we may be triggered by or may not like, then we've really got a chance of living in a more peaceful, better, whatever it is we want to call it, place.
Yeah, 100%. All right. So let's wrap this up. Let's finish with some, maybe one or two things for the audience to take away from each of us and, some things that they could maybe focus on. Would you like me to go
Go,
first or
go.
would you like to go first?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, for me, I think the balance of self-compassion and self-agency in whatever way works best for you is where it's at. I think everyone could benefit from more compassionate and tenderness and care and consideration for themselves and their real self. So the work that you were talking about, getting underneath and finding out what's really driving the bus. I'm not in favor of abdicating self agency and self responsibility for just being compassionate. I think the two have to go hand in hand for a quality of life that's a good one. And that's coming from a position that for me, I'm not going to retire to a cave anytime soon. I'm living in the world. I'm of the world and in the world, and so I think it's
And so are they in
balancing.
their cave, right?
Yes, true.
It's no different, right? Someone was saying that the other day. They were like, well, they're not in reality. It was like, what's reality? That's their
True.
reality, and yours is being at home with
It
your
is
kids.
true.
It's the same
Well,
stuff.
that's another conversation there,
Yeah.
right there. So, I mean, that's my main one, making sure we got the balance. And yeah,
Yeah,
over
yeah,
to
yeah.
you.
So what would I say on this? I think pay attention to the quality of how you talk to yourself,
Mhm.
firstly. And when people do say to me, I don't know how to be compassionate, what is compassion? It's literally like start paying attention to what are you saying to yourself on a day-to-day basis? What's your body telling you, to really tap in with sensations that might be happening in the system. So as we watch the self-talk, we can maybe tap into, some blockages maybe in the system, some, whether it's a racing heart, whether you've got tightness in your stomach, tingles, whatever it is. It's paying attention to the whole system of you. And most importantly, it's like as you see things arise and you may be in a place of judgment around them, and you say to yourself, how can I have compassion for myself around something I've done which isn't good? So say you've cheated on your partner, let's say, like clients will, say, I can't, how can I be compassionate for myself when I've done something like that? And it's like what we get to within that is realizing that there was a reason, may
Right.
not be the best of you in that moment, but there was a reason, the best that you had, that took you to something that was going to give you some sort of break from your own torturous self, whatever's going on in your life. And that's the choices you made. And that's the real crux of it. When you can come back to that and start to have compassion for yourself for something, badly that you've done, that's what was needed in that moment. Doesn't mean you're going to do it again. Doesn't mean there aren't better tools, but we can't change that. It's happened. So the more we can bring the compassion to ourselves for that's the best that we had in that moment, the more chance there is that we aren't going to do things again that may not be the best of us, let's say. But whilst we continue to judge those things, we're more likely to do them again, for one, and we're not going to be reaching potential. So bringing that, just bringing that in, and yeah, watching the self-talk, noticing how we're speaking to ourselves, why are we doing what we might be doing, where might it have come from for us, and from there there's a chance then to change, to pick some healthier tools, let's say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fabulous. Great share. Amazing.
Cool.
Okay, well, maybe the most self-compassionate thing for us both to do is to end this call.
And for the audience, sorry about that.
For the audience, maybe, but this was self-compassion. So hopefully you've enjoyed this one, and if you've got anything you'd like for us to talk about, any topics, any feed forward you've got for us, we'd love to hear it. I'll probably pop a couple of comments below after this session for resources that you can check out, and come say hi. So thanks for watching.
I just to add, sorry, just to and the more compassionate that we can be for self, the more genuinely compassionate we will be for others. Because we might kind of go, it's easy for me to do it outside, but not that well inside. If you're not doing that well for yourself, you're probably not genuinely being that compassionate for others. You may be being overly empathetic, or it may not be as genuine. So it's self first. Do this work for yourself, and then you will genuinely have more capacity for compassion for whatever for other people as well. So
Amazing. Well, thank you so much as always for this week.
Thank